We're going to kick off our third panel. Like I said a minute ago, we're talking about practical allyship. Brief synopsis, the sort of operating agenda for our panelists is as follows. We all have different scopes of leadership and spheres of influence. We lead our city toward better when we each individually practice practical allyship, coming together to minimize oppression and maximize opportunity. That's our umbrella statement. Obviously, we're going to try to unfold some of those layers and figure some of those things out. Our moderators today have been so easy to introduce because the excellence of their work has carved a very obvious and easy pathway toward them leading these challenging conversations. I must say this moderator introduction is the easiest one. It's just me. You already know who I am. Hi, everybody. I'm back. I'm still here. I'm sorry. I feel honored to work with this group to have this conversation. I know each of them, I would say, at different levels of intimacy. We've worked together on different kinds of things. Our lives and paths have intersected in different kinds of ways. But I know all of them to be highly effective and impactful people in the spheres that they've carved out for themselves to drive impact and influence. And I can't wait to be a part of this conversation. So, excuse me while I become a moderator. Okay. This is good. Okay. All right. My introduction question for each of you, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves, but it's kind of a large question, so I would love for you maybe starting closest to me and moving away. I know. I'm so sorry. I'll mix it up. We'll have fun. Names, name, pronouns if desired. What is your role, just so we sort of know the lens you're coming to this conversation through. But I'd also like you to add something personal to that. So maybe what kind of energy are you bringing in? Sort of how are you showing up human with us today? Or something like how maybe you're reflecting on something you've heard in the room today. Or maybe why a conversation of allyship is important enough to you to press pause on all of the other agenda items that you have to show up here on a couch and have a conversation with us. So name, pronouns, role, and something human. Allow us to see some of how you're showing up today. Is that all right? Can you do it?
I think I can do it.
Let's do it.
Can you hear me okay? I can't hear myself right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
I always like a little call and response, and we were just talking about the Pentecostal church earlier, and so I grew up in the Pentecostal church. I am not in the Pentecostal church today. I am Jewish, however, so maybe I'm leaning into the personal already. My name is Densil Porteous. I use he, they pronouns. I have the pleasure of serving as executive director of Stonewall Columbus, which is Central Ohio's LGBTQ community center and organization. I also have an opportunity to serve at, thank you. I also have the opportunity to serve as CEO of Pride Fund One, which is a venture capital vehicle that invests in LGBTQ identities, not only here in Columbus, but across the country, to ensure that they are part of the venture capital and entrepreneurship circle and market. Something personal in terms of how I'm showing up. I have a 5.5-year-old daughter that my partner and I were able to, my husband and I, we just got married back in May. So personal. That my husband and I were able to adopt a 1.5 years ago, and she started kindergarten this September at Columbus Public Schools. And I'm really excited for her to have that experience of going to public school, because I went to public school, and I think it's the right thing to do. You know, there you go. That's my personal.
Fabulous.
Thank you for having me today.
We're thrilled you're here. And if you follow Densil or don't on Twitter, you'll be able to track his day by the number of meetings he posts about. I can't keep up. Good. It's not a competition, thank goodness. But he gets around all over the country. Sounds not at all what I meant to say. He is all over the place, driving impact from the number of roles and responsibilities that you've been asked to fill, and I'm really honored that you carved out space for this. Julie?
Yeah. I'm Julie Kratz, so if you have a book in front of you, that is my book that, just on a personal note, I do DEI work for a living, so I have my own business focused on training and consulting, but why I'm really passionate about it, similar to what you shared, I've got 3 girls, and they certainly have a lot of privileges associated with some of their identities. But we know we're really far off, just from a gender perspective, hundreds of years from equality happening. And, you know, we're seeing some policy changes that are very unsettling for me right now. And I wrote the book because I just, if I was having conversations at home and struggling with the events of the summer of 2020 and just everything that continues to happen in our news cycle, I thought, if I do this work for a living and I can't talk to my kids about this, then there's a big problem. So that's something that's just really personal for me and why I do this work and why I love being in rooms with people that are making changes. I love all the diverse perspectives I've been able to see today and just thankful to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Damita Brown, I am the Chief Diversity Officer for America's 14th largest city. I had to put that plug in. And I am here really because it is really born out of passion for me. I believe that the work we do in diversity, equity, and inclusion hits people right at home. It covers, it meets them exactly where they are in terms of how they view themselves and their identities in and around the world and throughout the positions and roles that they play through life. It meets them where they look to take care of their families and secure their financial stability and freedom. And as we learned earlier today, it is central to their health and well-being. So the work that we do today is so vital that I think it's important that we come together and have these opportunities to learn and grow and share. Because let's face it, race work is hard work. And there are so many days that we go home and we wonder, is it all worth it? And when you walk out the door and you meet an employee or a partner or someone on the street who's had an opportunity to benefit from the work that you're doing, it is worth it. And so we need to come together as allies, and we're going to talk about that, come together as allies to bolster each other up. Because I truly do believe that our communities and our children and the future, our futures really depend on the work that we do today. And so that's why I'm here.
That's great. Thank you. Well, I just want to plug my own sort of energy that I'm bringing into this conversation too, because I'm part of the conversation. And I think this matters to me. I'm a straight white male, and I present as such, and in my conversations it is clear that that is the case. And I have a lot of folks asking me, why are you a part of this conversation? As if righting a wrong belongs to the one who's been wronged, right? And it's always very confusing to help people understand that a D&I conversation or a conversation of allyship, inclusion, and belonging is only the realm of those who are hurt by its absence, because we are all hurt by its absence, and inclusion is a rising tide that lifts all boats. It's not targeted altruism. And so the energy I'm bringing in is, though I may not sit in intersectional identities that have been a part of systemic oppression and marginalization, that I believe in the work of allyship and inclusion, and I fully believe that we all win when we get it right. And so I'm excited to have this conversation with you and thrilled to be a part of it. Let's start there. We hear the word allyship all the time. It's a very sexy word. We hear ally, everybody, it's June, and suddenly everybody's an ally, or it's something happens and suddenly everybody's practicing allyship. And so before we get too far into unpeeling some layers of like what's working and what's not, I'm wondering if we can come to a shared definition of what we mean, or maybe even what we mean when we say allyship or ally. A definition not necessarily that's so denotative it's dictionary oriented, but also one that isn't just a platitude of ally means everyone wins. Okay, but that doesn't tell me something about what we're talking about. And so I'm really curious to hear how each of you in your roles think about the word ally and allyship, and how you would qualify or explain it to somebody when you really want to onboard them into what you're talking about.
Sure, I'll start off. I don't want to go after you. So when I think of allyship, and so you've got to understand, Trevor was my professor, so I come from a policy background. And so when I think of allyship, I think of alliances. And I think about the gathering of strengths from one partner to another to promote protect, advance the causes or the ambitions of another. And so when I think about how those alliances can be aligned, they really become a very strong mechanism if done strategically. We can talk through that a little bit. It really can become a strong mechanism to enact enormous change for an individual, for a group of individuals, or even for a cause. And so for me, allyship is really bringing together those strengths in and outside of the room, when I'm present and when I'm not present, in order to advance my causes.
Yeah, I loved how you used so many action words. I think that's what's really missing. Allyship, performative allyship is something that's been very dangerous, and so allyship is intended to take action. So it's great to read the book, show up at the protest or get on social media and use your voice, but it's really about taking action to support somebody that's different from yourself. And I think it's also really important that we don't just talk about it from a race and gender perspective. We talk about it more holistically. We need more Daniels involved in this conversation. We need the people with power and privilege to be our allies. And unfortunately, there's a major fear factor right now around that. And so I think as you think about defining it, sticking to this question for now, it really is a choose your own adventure approach. There's so many ways you can show up as an ally. So if I'm teaching, how to be an ally, I'm very cautious with hey, here's how I look at it, but let's co-create a definition. Why don't you think about what it means for you and what kind of role you want to play? And I think allies show up consistently, intentionally, and they create other allies around them.
Yes. I think one of the spaces I step into when I have conversations around allyship is often that allies do what you tell them to do. So the person who, or the group that, or whomever it is that needs a thing or needs that support, which I think is a wonderful thing, that an ally shows up and does what you tell them that you need them to do. I think often the conversation I start to have that goes beyond just showing up and doing what we need you to do is the practice of thinking about and then creating things before we even say something. So I always talk about accomplice as well, right? That notion of moving on from allyship to accomplice to really being there at the forefront to encourage us to say, hey, this is a thing. To be a Daniel, to show up and say, hey, I'm going to put myself on the front lines and have these difficult conversations even if you aren't in the room. So that's something I think about.
Yeah, I love it. Gosh, there's so much I want to come back to, but you just bridged into a question I have so well. I just want to go right there. The spectrum of language that we use around allyship, right? You're an ally, and then you're an advocate, and then what was the word you used?
Accomplice.
An accomplice. Then you graduate to an activator. Maybe you could become an agitator, right? There's lots of A words, and we've built a whole spectrum of conversation around them, and I'm sort of being playful. For a lot of us, that has maybe been an instructive spectrum to think about in terms of the risk that we choose to bear in the journey of trying to support those around us. For others, it maybe has felt like a game of semantics, that it's like a video game where you level up, and now I think about myself as an activator, and I feel better about myself, or I feel neat, or something like that. And so I'm curious, as you think about the spectrum of that kind of language, do you think about this allyship and the actions around it as a spectrum of increasing risk assumption or something like that? Or does ally encompass all of those behaviors and the spectrum is something that we have gamified it with? Or something else?
I think to build off a theme from the last panel that we saw, it's a journey. It's not a destination. This work won't end in any of our lifetimes, unfortunately. But it is. And it's fluid. You don't get to just arrive at end in like a video game and I win. And a common mistake I think that people make is the self-proclamation that I am an ally. It really is in the eye of the beholder. Someone tells me I am an ally, and I don't think you are yet. You have some more learning to do. And I'm really cautious. One of the things I try to do with my language, because language is such a signal of allyship, the words we use really do matter, And so instead of saying I am an ally, it's just a subtle shift to I'm striving, I'm trying, using language that suggests I'm on that journey, and not centering myself. And I find that really hard as a white woman doing this work. I don't want to make it about me. I want to put the spotlight on others. And one of the things I think is really important for doing that is collecting stories from folks that have been marginalized or mistreated, and carrying those stories with you and sharing them as an ally, because we're limited to our lived experiences. I will never fully know what it's like to have a different gender identity or racial identity than the one I have. So that limits my lived experiences, but how can I kind of create windows into other people's lived experiences and really honor and carry those stories with me?
For me, I think an ally, it is a journey, but I think it requires the person to be what you need them to be in the room at the time. And that requires that I've done my work. So I've asked the questions, I've listened intently, and I've committed myself to showing up on a consistent basis, doing the work day in and day out. And so I agree with you. I don't think we ever get to a place where we arrive and I say, okay, today I'm an agitator, tomorrow I'll be an advocate or whatever. But I think it's really being what you need me to be at that time. And then having an opportunity to have a two-way street, coming back and talking with groups or individuals about the work. And how I can continue to support in that role, or how I can continue to be supported in that role.
And I think it is a journey, and it is a spectrum, right? I think we just saw that and heard that as we talk about it. I think you do need an ally to be your ally in the moment, because then you're not an ally if you aren't there sort of literally supporting me in that moment. But there is that notion of, over time, you have to understand the information that we give you to be an ally should be deepened, should grow. The information that you seek to be an ally should go deeper than what you knew to know what you need to know. So I think it definitely is both, but it's also clearly reflective of who is receiving that allyship, which I think is the most important thing.
Can you speak for a moment, and I don't, maybe this is a bigger question than just a moment, but we've said the phrase like do the work a couple of times, and especially as we think about you've got to be what they need in the moment. You're talking about a just-in-time delivery of support kind of, but to do those things, you've already had to do the work. Across the last couple of years, one of the things that I've noticed is this tension of how do I do the work if I can't ask the people that I think know what the work is without contributing to the exhaustion that they already feel about having to live as educators of everybody who already doesn't understand the work. So I want to sidle up to Densil and say, hey, don't worry, I'm an ally. Now, what is this whole thing about? I want to be able to do that because I'm an ally and we can do that. But then I know I'm contributing to exhaustion and other things that are already there. That's not allyship behavior, right? And so, or maybe, I don't know, do something, take this somewhere, you know what I mean? There's tension there.
It's like, here's the ball, run with it.
Save me from this question.
No, it's not a save, it's actually a great question, right, because I think, I think we can become, and rightfully so, we're human, exhausted when someone taps our resources. That's what happens at any resource, that you continually tap and tap and tap, becomes exhausted. But I think it is also someone's, if you so choose that destiny, to be able to say, hey, I'm open to that. I'm receptive to you asking these questions and exploring these topics. But you better be ready when I tell you stop, right? Like, today's not the day, go read a book. Right? So I think we have to create spaces of safety for those interactions, right? Like, you have to be thoughtful to think that when someone is asking these questions, it's not for ill, it's because they really want to know. And so today, though, it may not be the day for me because I don't want to talk about how gay I can be or how black I live today or what it was like for that experience. But hey, Paul, I need to be able to be respectful and say, hey, today's not the day. And you should be able to receive that and say, okay, you're not mad at me. Just today's not the day. Maybe I'll come back tomorrow. Great. Another day. So I think we, again, in reflecting our humanity, have to create these spaces of safety that allow people to do that work, right? And we have to believe, unless we know otherwise, that it's curiosity, right? That it's genuine curiosity that someone's coming to seek this information because they want to do the work, and they also realize that you might be a really great person to ask these questions of all the time, right? Like, I mean, it's in your title or it's in the work that you're doing, so why wouldn't I go to you first? You know, I mean, you have to realize that. So, and I think the more that people choose to live that publicly and out loud, then you're always going to get more and more people coming to you because they see you as a safe space to inquire and be prepared for that. But to the beginning, we just have to be, right, communication is key between parties, and so in the beginning, we just have to sort of set that expectation to say today is just not the day, or come back again, but always believe with positive intent that it's for learning and understanding.
I don't know why this analogy just came to me, but go with me for a second. I think allyship is the public expression of a private commitment. So you take on this work because you believe in the cause, the individuals that are impacted, and you take the time to do the private work of developing those relationships, a level of trust, a level of insight, so that you are armed to publicly go out and express that in the ways and the manners in which it can be expressed. And so I really think it starts with that private commitment to do the work, to invest in relationships and build the level of trust that gives you the credibility to publicly advocate on my behalf or on behalf of a cause. I think that's probably the crux of what allyship means for me when I think about this whole process.
Yeah, I love that, the private work, right? And you have to be careful. I think one, like the caveats for allyship, these are some of the pitfalls that a lot of people, well-intentioned people make, is, yeah, asking inappropriate questions or like not doing your own homework first. So my guidance is always like, Google the question first, and not everything you find on Google is going to be correct, but try to find a reputable resource first, and then use it as a springboard to an appropriate question. Like, hey, I saw this documentary, and it got me thinking about this issue. Could you give me some insight from your perspective on that? That's very different than asking someone to educate you about the history of racism, right? That's not a fair question to put on somebody. And to build on what you said, too, it's trust. You know, one of my facilitators on my team, a dear friend of mine, woman of color, you know, we've been doing this work for almost 8 years together, and she said the questions you were asking me the first year, Julie, were not always the best. And you've gotten better, and now that we've built trust and had a lot of experiences together, you can ask me bolder questions, right? And so an example of a question I asked that I would never ask someone else, just to kind of humiliate myself here, is I remember going ice skating and seeing only one person of color ice skating. Right? And the very next week, I happened to go roller skating, and I was one of the only white people roller skating, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about? I was like, what is going on here? It's like the same thing, different skates. And so I'm at lunch with Erica, and I was like, all right, I got to ask a question, and I just want to know what is going on with roller skating versus ice skating, right? And she's like, oh, girl, you know, and then just went into it. And she's like, it's socioeconomics, it's an artistic form of dance. Like, she was explaining all these things to me. But I don't think I could have found a resource online to answer that question, right? Or if I did, it'd probably be some weird stuff. So I guess I'm just sharing that, like, you know, just I don't get this right. I make mistakes. But I think if you have a trusting relationship and people know you're coming from a good place, they'll explain things to you. But always do your work first to understand it first if you can. I'll just say, like, one last quick story. I had a guy, oh my gosh, some of the stuff that people tell me is just funny. So this guy went through some of my allyship training, really well-intentioned guy, right? After the first training, he goes and sits down with a group of women at lunch, and he's like, I'm here to be your ally. Can you imagine? They all looked at him like, no thanks, right? Like, I don't want that, right? And so I think it's just being careful, like the saviorism thing is a really big deal. No one wants to be saved, right? It's not that self-proclamation, but try to do some stuff on your own and then leverage trusting relationships to dig deeper.
Yeah. I've sometimes advised people that humans are really good at discerning earnestness from idle curiosity. And so to double check yourself is a question you're going to ask driven by an earnest desire to learn and you're ready to hear a variety of answers that could challenge perspectives? Or are you just randomly idly curious about the history of racism or what it means to be blah, 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 blah? And it sounds like your responses kind of fit into that leveraging trusted networks. And anything else to add as you listen to other folks speaking? Anybody want to follow up anything? We don't have to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. I want to get a little bit granular or a little bit more concrete. In the topic notes, we said that we're seeking to come together to minimize oppression and maximize opportunity as sort of an umbrella, aspirational thing to say about allyship. Coming together to minimize oppression and maximize opportunity. When you hear that, what do you think of? Are there behaviors that come to mind? Are there certain people that come to mind? Do you have an example from your own experience when it has really felt like what is happening is minimizing oppression and maximizing opportunity here? I'd really love to hear, I think, for all of us to hear this worked, lean into stuff like this. And again, it will be individual to your experiences, but I think instructive.
So I think the work that Mayor Ginther has really championed around equity throughout the city, it has been very intentional. And it is intended to look across every aspect of city government, from the way in which we deliver services to our residents, to how we support various communities in their needs. So when we think about sort of removing, creating those opportunities, that's really what it's designed to do. So I appreciate having allies in the room when the street sweeping schedule is being created. And when communities in certain parts of our town who doesn't necessarily see street sweeping as often, that gets elevated and they get the opportunity to have the ability to see their neighborhoods clean as other neighborhoods. That's what we would consider a small thing, but it's a very big deal when it comes to the quality of life in your neighborhood, or when we're talking about how funds are distributed for affordable housing and where that housing goes and the policies associated with that. Having folks in the room as those policies are being created and having a very intentional conversation around ensuring that equity is front and center in all that we do has been a game changer. I think it's something that is that organizations and other cities can look to as a model, and I think it gives our community a great deal of hope that we're not just sweeping the streets, but we're really concerned about your street and your quality of life, and I think that matters.
I think about making space, and making space leans into the notion of opportunity, and making space leans into the idea of being really thoughtful and intentional about the space that you hold and power that you hold, whatever power that may be, whether you are a straight person stepping into a space that queer people aren't often there, or a person, a white person stepping into a space where you don't often see people of color, or a man in that sort of that same guy. So I think if we are thinking thoughtfully, intentionally about sort of that notion, it's always ensuring that whether or not someone else is in the room who may be able to talk about that we make space for the conversation, or we make space for the idea or the notion to ensure that it is considered. I think that's, that makes opportunity always present. Because we at least made space for the opportunity to have a conversation. We made space so that someone could step into the space. Now, of course, we want to make sure that when we make space, we really allow that space to be taken up by the thing that we are making space for. That goes back to sort of a notion of showmanship, showmanship allyship or something of that nature, right? Where you're saying it, but you're not really making the space for it. You're just kind of saying, yeah, I'm an ally, and then you move on. So always giving time to make space for these things to flourish, to have opportunity to hold on. I think that's essential.
Just a quick add there. When you make space sometimes for those conversations, we can have great intentions, but people might not show up as, they might have a microaggression moment or, a situation. I think when you talk about individual allyship, one of the most tangible things we can do is call people in. It doesn't have to be this rude, disrespectful, you're awful, and, shame and blame usually don't work well in those conversations, even though it feels really good to do. Instead, it's just like, hey, what do you mean when you said that? Or like, whoa, let's pause and go back to what was said. Or, hey, I noticed she was sharing that idea earlier. I think watching out for microaggressions or non-inclusive behavior is a really big deal in those conversations because, they're so commonplace, y'all. It's the cumulative effect on somebody. It's not the first time someone's been asked where they're from. It's probably 20 times that week, right? And so I think just acknowledging and asking people to be better, because I think people do want to be better and they want to join these conversations, but they don't even know what they're saying or doing is inappropriate. And if we don't let them know why, it is burdensome to have to keep educating people on why their behavior is a problem, but if they don't listen after the first time, that's on them, right? But if you don't say anything, then it's the same as saying that's okay to do again to somebody else. And that's always uncomfortable for me as a people pleaser and somebody that likes, doesn't like conflict. But I just remind myself, if I don't say something right now, someone else is going to have this experience, and I'm not really okay with that, right? So maybe I need to put my pride aside and step in.
That's reminding me of our conversation this morning from Paloma about the 6 core needs, right? And what I'm sort of hearing in that is part of sort of allyship behaviors are being on the watch around the protection of other people's 6 core needs, right? When is their belonging potentially being threatened? When is their ability to feel like improvement and progress is possible for them? When is that being, when is that under threat for them? Damita, you said, for you, what I heard, as you talked about what maximizing opportunity meant, I heard a lot about being vocal when resource allocation is happening, right? And Densil, I don't want to paint you in a corner, put you on the spot or something, but the first thing I thought of was, we could talk about Pride Fund or something. And I wondered if you'd just give us a quick, hey, here's what something in real time around resource allocation looks like as allyship behaviors.
And I think it's a great example. So thank you for the tee up. One of the reasons, when I stepped into the Pride Fund again, which is a venture vehicle for LGBTQ entrepreneurs and ventures, when I stepped into it, it was because I realized that no one was making space for queer people in the venture area, right? No one was making space for queer folks to tell their stories about the businesses that they were working on. No one was making space to invest in these organizations. And the reality is, and I'll give you the statistics, but the reality is that when you often look at entrepreneurs who are from underrepresented populations, we're working 3 and sometimes 4 times as hard as those who are in majority spaces, right? And the return is also equally as great, which I think is phenomenal. So when we think about the queer investment space in LGBTQ entrepreneurship, it's less than 1% of dollars given in that space, which seems ridiculous, less than 1%. When we then sit back and look at the number of businesses that are now finally led by out queer people, or the number of businesses, and I'm probably sure you all can think of some, that were started by queer people, right? When you think about where queer people are, because we're literally everywhere, probably in your families, and you just may not know, right? Right, sitting right here in front of you, and I'm all out and about it. But I think that's the reality, is that when we think about making space and talking about it, then you start to see people will step into it. So even in the year and a half to 2 years since the Pride Fund has started, we're now starting to see other funds similar to us popping up, right? Because we've made this space, and the community is now saying, oh, wow, we actually probably need to talk about this, right? Like that we're not being that thoughtful and intentional about making investment into viable businesses, into businesses that are sometimes, again, outproducing those that are coming from the typical venture capital folks who went to Harvard, Stanford, Yale, and went on to whatever business schools. When we're producing at higher rates, and maybe they're just smaller companies, you should still invest, right? Because, again, with an investment dollar comes growth, capacity, because a lot of these companies, from queer folks, we're not coming with generations of privilege on our shoulders, right? We're not coming from people who have gone through this process before, or mom and dad who were just able to give you $1 million to help you start up something, and sometimes we are, but that's not often the case in these spaces.
Yeah. And for those of us who maybe sit outside of the specific practice or exercise in that space, Densil creating and holding that space around Pride Fund, for instance, allows me to be on the lookout for people that can benefit from that, even though it's not the work that I'm doing, right? I had a conversation this morning, and somebody was talking about a project they were working on. I was like, you should talk to Densil. Oh, he'll be here today. Like, whoa. I mean, it was top of mind because I'm following Densil online, and I'm thinking about the work he's doing. I'm not doing it. I don't understand the VC world as an industry. I don't have that expertise, and I certainly don't understand it from his perspective. But he's creating a large digital footprint that's allowing me to at least sort of live vicariously in the space and be able to direct others into it. And it doesn't cost me anything, including effort, 0 effort. I just said his name, and I hope a relationship blossoms from that if it wasn't already there. He's doing the work to create space, to hold space, and I love that so much. Well, that's all yummy stuff. Let's flip the coin over a little bit and talk about performative allyship, a term that lots of us have probably heard. You called it showmanship allyship. I like that's a very descriptive term, particularly in the wake, it seems like, of tragedy, of big stuff, right? We've got folks jumping up, raising their hands, saying, "I'm here to be your ally. You can count on me." For me, performative allyship might look something like somebody saying something in order to collect social capital, without having to follow it or chase it with any significant effort or risk. I'm interested, if you think about it, any differently than that, if you can add nuance to that. My real question is, again, pretty concrete. Do you have examples of what that has looked like, sounded like, felt like, so that we have, without naming names, we're not looking for buses to throw people under necessarily, and we're not, and not to condescend toward other people, but I think we need examples of, like, it doesn't look like this, so that as we think about our own behaviors, actions, and choices, we can be aligning them to lean in when we need to and lean out when it's not going to benefit those we're seeking to ally with.
I mean, I think people are really good at figuring out when someone's genuine or not. As human beings, we're pretty well wired to, like, size up body language and just say if people are genuinely curious versus just, asking a bold question for, some ulterior motive. So I think keep that in mind. I think if people show up genuinely, you're probably not going to fall into that performative ally trap. But one story I remember, summer of 2020, right? Like George Floyd's murder. I had been doing DEI work for a long time before that. And all of a sudden, it was March. Everything in my business went away. Like, literally everything went away. And I had corporate leaders telling me, that's just not important right now. Or we're going to have to just put that on hold, that diversity stuff, right? So I was devastated, like personally just devastated, because it's core to who I am. And then, what happens in May. And then suddenly, just an explosion of people contacting me in June. And for me, that was just, obviously everyone was experiencing pain around this. For me, it was just such a telltale sign of where we are from a performative allyship perspective. Because if you're turning on and off a budget, it doesn't matter. And luckily, I am thankful most organizations that I get to partner with now are committed for the long run. They have a strategy around it. If this isn't baked into your culture and your strategy, like, stop it, like, go there first. And they're committed to the long-term education on it. Because if you're just doing an annual unconscious bias training, like, forget about it. Like, that's not enough. And that actually causes a backlash effect, too. I think it ticks people off more than it does good. So, again, back to being intentional, genuine, I think you can fall out of that performative allyship trap. And one last thing, just make a regular practice of doing something with diversity. For me, it's like, read a book or two a month. That's how I like to show up, right? But it could be, amplifying other people's voices, following different people on social media, diversifying your network. I mean, there's so many tangible things you can do, I think, to demonstrate allyship. Not that it should be like an hour on your calendar a month, but if that's how you do it, like whatever you need to remind yourself, like, oh, I got some work to do. I need to think about that. And it's just always kind of running in the background like it would anything else that's important to you.
I like that, and I think what I often think about is it's a steady drumbeat, right? So it's sort of maybe it is an hour a week or an hour, whatever. As long as that drumbeat is happening, keep it going. It's not a once a month Black History Month. You pop in and you jump out, right? That's not what it is, right? It's a continual conversation, or continued education, or continued existence in that space, so that it becomes commonplace for you each and every day. As we talk to our corporate partners at Stonewall, right? I'll take your money in June, thank you very much, right? I'm not gonna, it funds my programming all year long, but that relationship also means that it's a relationship all year long. So I will remind you, right, in October that it's LGBTQ History Month and you should be educating your employees about things. I will remind you in February that, there are Black queer people in the world, so you could still talk about it in February, right? I think leaning into that steady drumbeat conversation is something and we probably all do the same thing. We have our practice, we brush our teeth every morning, hopefully you do, or maybe at bed every night, right? But you do it, right, because it's become part of your common practice, and we understand it because we don't want to have cavities, we don't want to, right? We think about the future, and so I think it's the same thing in this notion of allyship. Whatever it is that you have to do to ensure that you're practicing that steady drumbeat each and every day, or every month, or whatever it is, so that it becomes ingrained into your mental capacity that you don't even have to think about it anymore because it becomes so natural. That's what it is, right? That's how we lean into it. That's what I tell every corporate partner that I partner with now, but I also let them know that part of that is accountability, right? So now that we are partners in this space, I will hold you accountable. Thank you for your money, but I will still hold you accountable, right? I'm going to call you and say, you didn't do something right. You messed up. But it's also my responsibility as an accountability partner to tell you how you can be better next time, right? And if I see that you weren't better next time, I will again speak up and say something. Because just because you gave me those dollars to invest in my program does not mean that I can't tell you that you did something wrong. If anything, that means I should call you and tell you did wrong, right? Because we have a relationship now. That's like buying me a diamond ring. If you bought me a ring, I'm gonna tell you you messed up, right? You just put something on my finger, so I'm gonna tell you, so because I want you to be better, right? Because if we're gonna spend this relationship and this life together, then you gotta understand it. You gotta understand what to do, how to do it, so that I'm not upset and telling you to get out of my house later.
Yeah, that's great. I like that a lot. That's good.
Maybe the only thing that I would add is, so I've been at this work for a long time. I know I don't look it, but probably better than 20 years now. And I've seen causes come and go, and we used to refer to it as the flavor of the month. And so this month we're chasing this thing, and the next month, it's cool to champion Black people's issues, and so we're rushing to that. At the end of the day, we don't need a savior, And I think the mistake that I've seen in these inauthentic activities to form an allyship or to be an ally is this savior complex. This, something's wrong with you, and so I need to save you from yourself, right? But rather, what we really need is a partner. What Densil has talked about. I need a partner in the room that says, that ain't right. And we're going to do something about it at the highest levels of the organization. When we see it, we're going to call it out, and we're going to deal with it. I don't need your savior complex. I need you to fix the problem. And I think we've got to move our organizations from that. It's not an organization's job to fix the problem, or in that sense, but it is your job to understand and respond appropriately. And I think we've got to look at that differently, that we really need to look at what's happening in our environments, what role we even play in it, and how we begin to respond in a respectful and honorable way that really keeps intact the dignity of the folks that we wish to serve.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of saviorism and kind of the saviorism complex, wondering, I'm confident that each of you in your own lives have people that you think about as allies that have consistently showed up, or, well, I don't want to speak to your experience, but my question is, in this quest to really empower and educate people who could and should be allies, in a desire to encourage these kinds of behaviors and actions and decisions and so forth, what are steps you see people being effective allies taking so that they don't acquire this sense of sort of saviorism, look at me helping the little guy? Because I'll admit, twice on this stage already, it has been said, oh, we need more Daniels. You know what? That feels good, right? I'm going to chase this. Allyship is good for me now, right? And my brain says that's like, that's emotional glucose. I want some more of that. It is hard now to make decisions divorced from, if I get up here, everybody in the room is going to think I'm a good guy, right? What am I really trying to do? And so what are maybe a concrete thing you've seen allies that you respect take to sort of shed the saviorism complex or protect from it maybe?
I gave a compliment just yesterday. So I'm going to shout out Auditor Megan Kilgore. If you don't know her, she is a fabulous woman and advocate, just a phenomenal woman. What she does for me on a consistent basis is open the door. She just invites me into rooms where I would not otherwise be invited, and sets a stage for me to share my platform. And that has created opportunities over and over again to just merely continue to push the mayor's agenda, the work of our office, and to keep D&I front and center. So just opening the door does wonders.
Well, that's a great example. Great example. I mean, being a sponsor like that in rooms where if you're in rooms where decisions are made, make sure people that aren't in those rooms, their voices are heard. Because oftentimes those rooms are very majority group represented. So I love building off of that. I'd say too, like, systems work is so important. And system stuff is hard. We need more people advocating for systems to change so that we don't have to keep chasing the problems that emerge from broken systems. And so I know we have a mixed audience today, but in the corporate work I do, what that looks like is dissecting the employee experience. How are we hiring? How are we recruiting? Where are we going to find talent, right? What biases do we have in our job descriptions? I mean, you wouldn't believe the job descriptions I see with where it's like quarterback and you're not going to get diverse talent, groups of people to apply for those jobs if they don't see themselves reflected in those roles. And looking at who we promote and who we don't. I mean, that data is super compelling, turnover data. And once you gather those aspects of the employee experience and take a look at it, it's impossible to acknowledge, to pretend we don't have a problem. Like, we've got a problem. Everybody has a problem. One thing people love to tell me is our industry is not very diverse. And I'm like, I actually had someone ask me once, tell me about a person of color dominated industry. And I was like, that doesn't exist. You know that, right? Even nonprofits are usually run by white men. So I think we just really need to dispel that this is just our organization or just our industry or our city is such. Those are excuses. Stop using excuses. We need people to address the problem. And the last thing I'll say is, I think it's really meaningful when allies speak into those systems that they benefit from. Especially, this is why, again, Daniel, not to give you more glucose, but this is why when he says something about a broken system, people carry it differently because it doesn't stand to really benefit him, although it does. But it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like he would have as much skin in the game per se. Okay, and so I think when allies speak into broken systems, your voices are heard in a different way, and you probably have proxy to power where people are going to take what you say and do something with it.
I often think of the song "Move Out the Way." Move, get out the way. And it's kind of true, right? So Damita, which Megan is a wonderful example, right? To think about an individual who says, come along, let me talk about who you are, and then I'm gonna get out the way.
Yeah. Yep.
Like that's amazing, right? Like I'm gonna make the connection, I'm gonna do the intro, I'm gonna tell them how amazing you are, and I'm gonna walk away because you're gonna show them how amazing you are, right? And I think that to me is I think possibly a good way for someone to avoid probably coming in that savior complex position, and maybe they start to see themselves again as a partner in that position, right? To say, I'm not here to save you, I'm just here to give you a space because I have a little bit of privilege, and I'm gonna walk away because you can do your own work, right? I'm not here to sit here and tell your story, but if you aren't here, I can tell your story because I'm a partner in the work, and then I'm gonna say, now go interview so-and-so, right? Talk to someone else about it, right? In the queer community, I don't identify as trans, I don't walk around the world in that space, but I have absorbed and listened to the stories of folks so that I can then share those stories, and then I say, now go and seek that information on your own from someone who lives that experience. So I think those sorts of things, if allies continue to check themselves and say, okay, it's my responsibility to make space and then walk away, great. It's my responsibility to give someone the opportunity to tell their own story, wonderful. It's my responsibility to make the introduction so that someone else can do the work of uplifting who they are, then that's great. I think hopefully, I mean, from where I stand, hopefully that will help someone understand and start to shift from even a savior notion to a partner notion.
Yep.
I noticed none of you said put I'm an ally on your Twitter. Is that not? What I'm noticing for real is that all of you answered the least sexy parts of this conversation, right? Allyship is when I get to feel good because I'm addressing a wrong in the moment. And sometimes it's blame and shame, and that can feel really good and self-righteous. And sometimes it's just righting a wrong, and that also feels good. But what I heard you say was open the door and just get out of my way. I don't need you to save me. You need to fade into the background now. I heard you say educate yourself. Do the work consistently. Develop a rhythm of learning. That's not sexy, that's just hard. I heard you say, educate yourself around inequitable systems and start dismantling those systems. Not sexy, right? And I'm just noticing, and I honestly hadn't thought about it before until the three of you just said it, just queued it up. Maybe as we think about allyship in ways that we drive impact and influence in the world, the less fun it seems from the outside could be a source of questioning around it. Maybe it's the most impactful place to get started, and the place that feels the best and most exciting might feel the best to me. It might not be driving the most influence and impact to others. Last question, quickly, Julie, about your book, which folks now have. Is there anything that you would ask them to think about, or any direction you would give as they start to interact with that book?
Yeah, I mean, to build off what you said, I mean, allyship, it can be sexy, I think, sometimes. It's not all bad. Hopefully we're not doom and gloom. But no, I mean, most people, when you ask them towards the end of their life, what was the most impactful thing you did? What's the most important thing to you? Almost unanimously, people say helping somebody else. And at the core, that is what allyship is helping other people and leveraging your privilege and advantages for good. And so I actually think you do get better as a human being by practicing these skills. For me, personally, I mean, I'm always going to be on this journey. I call myself an ally in training. Like, there's so much more I have to learn. But I have noticed rewards in my friendships and my partner and how I show up with my kids by practicing these skills at home and in all aspects of my life. And I think it feels really good at the end of the day to be like a Megan that gets to introduce you to like really cool people and then get out of the way. I mean, that's something that's really impactful and does feel good. So I do think that there's some really fun sides of allyship that just makes you a better human in general. And then the last thing I'd say, I'd love to stay in touch with folks. I put an invite out for a free training I'm doing on best practices around DEI. So if you want to learn more, there's a QR code on all the tables as well, or you can grab one on the side table over there. But stay in touch. I'm always trying to collect stories and experiences. So if something resonated with you, I would love to chat more and learn more about your story too.
That's great. That's great. Would you join me in thanking the panel for showing up today with us? I've gotten awfully comfortable in this chair, so I'm just going to close us from here, if that's okay with you. As we close, you'll find in your program book an insert with a QR code, right? If you open your phone's camera and hold it over that QR code, it'll prompt you to click on it and open a website. It's just a very, very brief survey. It will probably take you less than a minute to complete, just with some starting place reference points for us to think about your experience here. You may see an email from us later where you can provide some additional details or feedback. Your feedback is really important to us because we want the ongoing conversations that we facilitate through this platform to be meaningful to you. And so you'll see an email from us. But if you do that little survey through the QR code, as you exit today, exit the way you came. We've got a bunch of goodie boxes full of lovely, lovely things for you. And you can just flash that, hey, success, you completed the survey, on your way out and get a goodie box full of stuff. They'll probably give you one if you don't do it, which I hope they will. But please do that because it is super helpful to us. I just want to thank again the Mayor's Office, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion with the City of Columbus. Director Brown, thank you so much for facilitating our entire day. Thank you, thank you, thank you to those of you who stuck with us through the conversations, through the day. So appreciate you investing your time with us. The last thing I'll say is please feel free to run if you've got to run. We're busy, important people, all of us. Please feel free to take your time as you leave, to relish in a new connection or make a new one, to relish in an old connection. We've got the step and repeat, and our photographers are still here. There's probably some food laying around somewhere if you want to restock. There's a snack bar. You can feel free that you don't have to rush out, that you can take the next half hour or so and just be if you want to be. Thank you so much for being here, and we will see you next time.